this is a big episode. I got notes. Good. It's interesting because this was maybe one of, I don't know, a lot happened in this episode, but a lot of it happened at the very end. And it's interesting to see how things seem really important at the very beginning. Like one of my notes here says Bernard knows that Elise is missing, right? But I just recorded my episode 5 and 6 theory discussion episode, and it's funny to see how much of that was more than likely wrong, especially in regards to Teresa and what she was doing and things like that. I guess the big we'll get to the huge thing at the very end, but the bigger thing, or not bigger thing, the other sort of stuff going on, which is sort of like the maneuvering around Ford, because the board, well, they claim they want him fired because Delos wants the artificial intelligence technology. What they want that for, I can't say. It's probably other androids, soldiers, whatever. And that they just don't care really about the narratives and stuff. Or the entertainment factor of the park. They care about it as a science experiment. So it's interesting that then what I originally thought was going on with Teresa was that maybe she was helping Arnold. But it's clear that she was helping Delos and that she was working to help back up the artificial intelligence technology, so that way, if they fired Ford, that they could still have it under their control without him perhaps deleting it all, because it was all backed up on site under his purview. So I'm not really sure where Arnold comes in all of this now, because I thought that might have been all of his doing. But we'll come back around to that. The other thing we have here is, like, the other big storyline was Will, right? Will and Dolores doing their thing, literally, because they finally got together and whatever. Even though right before that, Will literally gave a whole speech about why he couldn't, because he had a wife back home or fiance and whatever. But as much as this story has been about Arnold and stuff and all that's been forward, it's also been sort of how Westworld is breaking Will. And it's funny because at the end of his storyline, they come to the mountains where the mountain reaches the ocean, and it's the landscape that Dolores had dreamed of and had painted not more than 10 minutes ago. But also interesting is the clothes that Lawrence is wearing, because he looks exactly as he does when he shows up to get hanged. I don't know if that has any significance or anything, but it might. In terms of where Will and Dolores' goal is to find the maze, and so I can't imagine, in terms of the two timeline theory, at least, that if they find the maze, then the Man in Black would not be looking for the maze. I imagine what's more likely is that they will converge around the maze at the same point, and Will have to kill the Man in Black or something, in order to become the man in the maze, or whatever the hell. It'll cement his complete turn to the dark side, because that's where we're going. He's breaking out of his shell, his being his pretend self, as he says. The other storyline was Maeve, right? The third one. Each episode tends to have 3, and Maeve's was much smaller than the others. The only interesting things of note were that she's so self-aware that the commands don't work on her anymore. Like when the lab techs came in to grab Clementine, they froze everybody, but she was still totally aware of what was going on and able to move. Originally, I had the words "Bernard is fired" on my notes, and it's funny to see how that's really the least important thing to happen to Bernard in this episode. Or even that the board creates this, they try to create this false narrative in order to get Ford fired and stuff, and, it's more than likely that Ford saw clean through that the whole time, and obviously so did Bernard. And so now we have to get to the ending, the big stuff. It was one of those things that they telegraphed, like, they made it so the audience was just about half a step ahead of the show, because this is not me patting myself on the back, this is just how I think they did it on purpose, because Bernard was way too chummy with Teresa after getting fired. He was so totally cool with her and stuff that it that immediately sets off alarms, right? And he's like, I gotta go show you something. And so they go to Sector 17, which is Ford's house, and they try and make you think at first that he's gonna sell out Ford one last time, or something like that. But it's dark, there's no one in the house, and now from this point on, when he was bringing her to the house, I knew Teresa was dead, because my original thought was he was going to leave her in the house, and the hosts that she could not, or Bernard could not control, Ford's hosts that he was building, he would leave them to kill her. I was partially right. Then they went into, then he started talking about the house that he couldn't see, or that the hosts couldn't see, and then the door that Bernard could not see. And that's when we got a little sixth sense going on here. To the point where you started to realize maybe what was going to go on. I was like, okay, well, maybe Bernard's just going to kill her, right? And he's going to leave her body down there, right? Because even though he had claimed he had not been there before, it was very obviously the room that he had been talking to Dolores in. Whenever Dolores and Bernard were having their conversations, it was in that room. Now that room is obviously still building more hosts, right? Those are the hosts that are under Ford's control. And as we learn, right, the big revelation is that Bernard was a Cylon all along. Is that he had reached peak. He passed the Turing test. He claims to have worked there for years and years and years and years. He had his whole relationship with Teresa and all that stuff, and had just, gotten in a way to get under her skin and stuff. And, she was persistent. She wouldn't take Ford's threats, and so she paid for it. And so in the end, Ford tells her, I wasn't going to let you take any of this from me. And I guess Bernard being a host is a theory that had been floated around there for quite some time, but I hadn't heard that one before. I imagine there's theories about each and every character being a host, because in a show where the humans and robots look exactly the same, how could you not, right? It's the same Battlestar Galactica thing where, who's really a Cylon and who isn't, and all that stuff. It makes you wonder now what role Arnold has to play in this, because I thought that maybe he was trying to steal all the code from, or get revenge against Ford or something and stuff. And now some people wonder if Bernard talking to Dolores, if those conversations come from Arnold's code and not from Ford, despite the fact that Ford built and, my assumption, programmed Bernard, at least, Maybe not the base code, which Arnold probably wrote, but everything else came from Ford. I mean, we only have 3 episodes left at this point, and things are starting to ramp up. It just makes me wonder, now where can they go from here? Right, the maze is, my assumption, is the end goal. Maybe at the end is Arnold's host, you know, his goal. I'm not really sure. I apologize for the camera shake. My monitor had crap on it. So yeah, I mean, if you guys have any theories on that, let me know, because like, I was so sure that the data stealing and Teresa and all that stuff was, you know, it all fell under one umbrella. But it seems like there are like actually 4 or 5 different antagonists in the season, and that, you know, Arnold might be the driving force behind most of them, but he's not the driving force behind all of them, right? And you have to wonder, like, does, you know, Ford killing Teresa is certainly a villainous act, but is he the villain of the season? I doubt it. I don't really think that anything is working to defeat him. If anything, you know, Teresa was the antagonist, right? Depending on who we view as the good guys and the bad guys and stuff. And obviously that line is supposed to be extremely blurry, and that's the whole idea. But in terms of, you know, what Ford was doing versus what Teresa was doing, you know, Teresa was trying to ruin Westworld. And so, you know, she was Ford's antagonist at the very least. You know, and I have to imagine that there probably are a few other personnel that are hosts, but I can't imagine, they played that card on one of the more major characters in the show already. So to play it on that kind of character really means that you can't do it anymore. Though at first I thought maybe the board member was also a host, the woman the board supervisor, whoever came down to visit, because she says that it requires a blood sacrifice, right, to Teresa, and then that's the exact same phrase that Ford says to Teresa before she dies. And I don't know if that just means that's part of the game that he claims he and the board play, or what. You know, I feel like, you know, by the end of the season, we'll know what Ford's new storyline is, because that will more than likely play heavily into season 2. We'll know what the maze is, I guess. My hope so the other thing that I didn't really mention was that at the end of the episode, Maeve wants to escape. She wants to be let out. She wants to be set free. And I'm not sure that, like, that's interesting. Like, I get that that's the culmination of this plot line, but do we actually want to know or see the real world outside of Westworld? Like, if we were to go into, like, Rome World and Knight's World, which are the other 2 parks in the show, or in the world, at least in the movie they were. My assumption is that they still exist here. That would help break up the monotony of it being of the setting again, without having to dive into the real world, because it's sort of that contrast between the very open Western areas and the very claustrophobic science fiction areas that make it interesting. It's hard for me to imagine them then having, like, Maeve maneuvering in the outside world and stuff like that. That just doesn't sound like the show. But what the hell do I know? I got some of my other stuff wrong, so and that's fine. I'm totally glad to be wrong, because that means it's no fun to know what's going to happen, right? It takes the mystery out of it. So even though I knew that Bernard was a host about 30 seconds before it happened, you know, it was still a exciting reveal, and positions Ford in a very interesting light, because up until that moment we didn't really know where he sat. He was just sort of that ambiguous character who was and wasn't a villain. He was just that guy trying to protect his own creations and stuff, you know. But, he says that they are free under his control, right? But he also doesn't like his attitude towards the host is one of not disdain, but apathy. So I don't know. I'm rambling now, and this video is 15 minutes long. So we'll see what happens next week.